evening and welcome to this special live discussion here in our studios at NCN on Homestretch Avenue. I have with me in studio this evening Madam Gail Teixeira, Presidential Advisor on Governance and the government's Chief Whip in the National Assembly. She's joining me tonight to discuss some recent political developments in the country. Madam Teixeira, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
His Excellency President Ramotar returned in the country today from an overseas assignment
The
in
BRICS
Brazil,
meeting, yes.
the BRICS meeting in Brazil, and received a letter from the leader of the Alliance for Change,
Yes.
Donald Ramotar, with regards to his intentions to put a no-confidence motion against the government. Let us first talk a little about Mr. Ramotar's letter.
Yes. I think the public is aware that the press for the last 2 weeks have been covering the AFC's statement that they want to move to a no-confidence motion against the government. They did not appear to have won support from the APNU. So obviously something has changed, because they wrote tonight, on the 17th, to the President. The President came in today and received the letter, which is basically saying to the government that it will be, and I'll quote from it, Mr. Ramjatan says, "I'm aware that Article 106.6 of our Constitution provides an option that is currently being discussed nationwide. That is the forced resignation of the Cabinet, including the President, following a defeat in the National Assembly on a vote of no confidence." He goes on to say, "Our party sees no other alternative than to proceed with this constitutional mechanism for removal of an unpopular government that has ceased to enjoy the confidence of the National Assembly," etc. So that the letter is very clear. It has indicated the AFC's intention to move to a no-confidence motion, as they said, to defeat the government, and that the basis on it has to do with the financial paper number 1 of 2014, which they claim is a clear contravention of Article 217 of the Constitution and the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act. The President received the letter and the contents in which the AFC claimed that the government had acted unconstitutionally in relation to bringing the financial paper on a number of items which the Parliament had disapproved during the budget debate. The President has responded to the AFC tonight, and basically there are two basic matters that are raised. One is the President recognizes the constitutional right to lay a no-confidence motion in the National Assembly by the AFC or any other party. However, he has made it very clear that the grounds for their motion and the grounds on which they will bring their motion of no confidence is completely baseless and spurious. And we substantiate the argument in that the Constitution 2183 makes it clear that the Minister of Finance can proceed to spend money in what is statements of excess for matters that there has been no appropriation or there's not sufficient appropriation, and therefore he is within his right to do that. So although they're quoting Article 217, they're not quoting Article 2183, which allows the Minister of Finance. Our argument is further bolstered by the Chief Justice ruling on the 18th of July 2012, ironically 2 years ago today, that the minister was in his right under 2183 to decide on what is a finding of insufficiency of an appropriate amount and to proceed in that direction. So we are quite convinced that the constitutionality of the act by the Minister of Finance on behalf of the Cabinet of Guyana is totally in order. And furthermore, the President has said to the AFC, and he has pointed out to the AFC, and I will go into that later, that we're prepared to face elections and to bring them to count, the AFC to count, for the things they've done in Parliament and the developmental projects they have blocked in the National Assembly, which have hurt the Guyanese people badly.
But we will come to the, in terms of preparation for elections and what would have happened so far in the 10th Parliament. But the grounds on which the motion is coming is the
Yes.
fact that the budget was cut in 2012, 2013,
Yes.
2014.
Yes.
In 2012 and 2013, the minister would have brought supplementary budgets.
Supplementary financial papers, yes.
And those papers, I think, if my memory serves me right, would have enjoyed the support.
Yes, the financial paper number 1 of 2012 and number 1 of 2013 were statements of excess, as is this paper of 2014. It's a statement of excess where we're going for monies from the consolidated fund in which there was either insufficient or no monies available in the appropriations, so that a precedent has been set, the Parliament recognizes and approved. So why in 2014 is this an issue now?
Well, that's the question, and I hope you can help me to answer it.
Well, I can't speak for the AFC, you know. I really find it difficult to explain the AFC's actions at many levels and many times in Parliament. Their behaviour is absolutely reckless and extremely hurtful to the Guyanese people. The fact that they have, for the last 2 weeks, been talking about this, and in fact, some of the reports have been absolutely confusing. They're going to the police, they're then going to the courts, then they're going to bring a no-confidence motion, then they're going to write the president. Well, they seem to have decided that the recourse for them was to bring a letter to the president. And so we are saying that they have a right to do this by the Constitution. We are not in any way saying that they don't have such right, because they do. However, we feel that the grounds on which they want to bring the government down are totally baseless. And when they're using the Constitution incorrectly and using the wrong section of the Constitution, it is for political purposes to create, I think, great nervousness and instability in the society.
But the opposition in Parliament, Mrs. Teixeira, incidentally, is dominated by lawyers. Are they not aware of the provisions in the Constitution for the minister to make this withdrawal? Or is it a case where, like the government has been arguing all along, it may be because of having the majority in Parliament, it is being used?
I think it's all of that, but it's also they're trying to create hype, they're trying to create confusion in the minds of people, and to be able to show that they have power. The fact that they're using the power under the wrong wrong article of the Constitution, for many of the Guyanese citizens, they're not aware of that. And so this is what I think is intimidation politics, bullying, and therefore trying to call bluff. And the government is saying, first of all, you have a right, you can go ahead. Two, the grounds on which you're doing it are baseless because the Constitution provides for this, and we're boasted by the Chief Justice ruling. What more do you want? But in case you want to go, I want to quote from what the President says to the AFC because I think it's instructive. The President says, the PPP Civic and I are prepared to face the consequences of such a motion and the electorate. And he goes on to then say, the AFC will have to explain to the Guyanese people their denial of them having cheap energy by opposing the hydropower station at Amaila, and therefore opposing the industrialisation of our country, the creation of jobs for people, particularly our young. He then also says that you voted against the Guyanese people better health care due to your opposition to a specialty hospital. You will need to clarify for the electorate whether it was because your client, Feder Lloyd, lost out in the bidding process to construct the complex. The President also points out that you will have to explain to the electorate of your opposition to the construction of the Marriott Hotel, which was rooted in the fact that your chief financier is also in the hotel business, and we know who that is. The President goes on to say that why was the chairman of the AFC, why did the chairman of the AFC interfere with the judicial process, causing persons who are charged with the Lusignan massacre to walk free, and so on. And therefore, the call by both the AFC and APNU to close down the sugar industry, thereby jeopardizing lives and the livelihood of thousands of sugar workers. These are all things the President is saying, you want to go to elections, you have to answer to the Guyanese people. And the last point is in relation, of course, to the cuts of budgetary allocations to the indigenous people, affecting development in their communities, and so on. So that all those issues under and the final nail in the coffin, as far as I'm concerned, to the AFC threat that they are forced to go to remove, as they said, the government, is that they will have to explain to the Guyanese people why they oppose the anti-money laundering and countering financing of terrorism bill, which has led to our country being exposed to international sanctions and our people to economic and financial hardships. And so the president is very clear. He is not going to be bullied, and he will stand by the Constitution. And he stands by the Constitution in terms of the expenditure by the government to provide monies for what are legitimate and needed areas for the execution of the government's programs. And yet at the same time, we say to them, we recognize your right to proceed with a no-confidence motion.
But if the motion, and just some clarity here, if the motion is being moved on not so solid grounds, in this case, the motion, there is no proper grounds for the motion with regards, because the minister acted according to the Constitution. Could they still go forward with the motion on that grounds?
Well, obviously, the no-confidence motion all motions have to be approved by the Speaker. The Speaker is expected by the Constitution and the standing orders to ascertain whether the motion is in order. And so the matter will fall into the Speaker's lap, and I believe that being a member of the AFC, he will be hard put to be totally objective on this issue. And probably that's why the whole configuration of Parliament with the opposition controlling both Speaker and Deputy Speaker shows its true value at this point. But that a no-confidence motion, once the Speaker approves and says it's in order, even if it were based on aspects of the Constitution that are incorrect, but assuming or that he would allow that, therefore then the matter would come to the House. It would have to have notice, which means there would be a timeline for response. Certainly in the case of Rohi, the no-confidence motion against Rohi, you may recall that a no-confidence motion, even against an individual member or minister, should have notice. And the Speaker at that time allowed the debate to start the very day that the motion was presented to Parliament. And we had to start the debate right then. So the Speaker, by his own action, has set a precedent. We argued against it, saying that any no-confidence motion, whether against the government or a minister, must have notice and therefore has to have a period of time that you come back to debate it. But that wasn't allowed in that occasion, but this is probably a matter of greater importance. This is a motion that will bring down the government, and that is the intention of it.
But let's go back. We spoke about what has been happening so far for the 10th Parliament. Let's talk a little about the actions of the opposition in Parliament with regards to not only the major infrastructural projects, but also bills, motions, attempts to shut out the private sector from having their voice heard in Parliament, chronicling what happened from 2012 to now.
I mean, I know that they said that this was the 10th Parliament had a new dispensation, and I believe many voters for the AFC and APNU actually believe that. It has turned out to be an absolute fallacy. It's a joke in that they have defeated 9 bills of the government, excluding financial papers, or items on financial papers. But they've defeated 9 bills of the government. The first anti-money laundering bill, the firearms bill, a whole range of them, 9 bills that they have defeated. They have refused to listen to petitions, both by the Private Sector Commission and by persons in the cricket community that appeal to them. Yet their own motions or petitions to the Parliament have been heard, have been laid, and so forth. So in the behavior on the money laundering, that is probably the most revealing and probably the most absolutely unacceptable. That it would put this country on a trajectory that would put us into put us on the table for international sanctions at the level of FATF. The behavior is morally, ethically, legally totally unacceptable and should be not accepted by the electorate of this country. But this new dispensation has been basically old political habits in new forms, and that is, bullyism and intimidation. There's been no difference. And in fact, we have sent to Parliament requests for 2 members of the AFC to be taken to the Privilege Committee. One of them, Mr. Ramjatan, because, in Parliament, you're not allowed as an MP to have what is called a pecuniary interest in a matter that's coming to the House or in the House. And so that Mr. Ramjatan's client, Federal Lloyd, at the time when it was placing a bid for the tender of the specialty hospital, he supported the budgetary allocation for the specialty hospital. When his client lost the bid, he voted against the supplementary financial paper for the specialty hospital in the following year. The financier of the AFC, who is publicly declared he's a financier of the AFC, Mr. Badal, has been opposed to the Marriott Hotel project all along. Obviously, for obvious reasons. He's a hotelier and he doesn't want competition. And the AFC has consistently, outside of Parliament, tried everything to block the Marriott project. So we have quoted from 1695 in the Erskine Maze that the offer of money or other advantage to any member of Parliament for the promotion of any matter whatsoever, depending on or to be transacted in Parliament, is a high crime and a misdemeanor. And therefore, under both the standing orders, where you're not allowed to have a professional interest in a matter coming before the House, and if that is the case, you recuse yourself. You publicly declare it and you recuse yourself. So you're not allowed to vote on the matter. So we have brought this to the attention of Mr. Trotman, and we've also brought one in relation to Mrs. Cathy Hughes in her non-declaration of her pecuniary interest as the public relations firm for South Global and their vote in relation to the Amaila Falls hydro project. So these are both issues where parliamentarians may have a pecuniary interest, but they're supposed to declare them and to recuse themselves from voting. In both cases, neither was done. So we're taking very strongly, and these were sent early in the week prior to the letter coming from the AFC, so that I don't know whether it's a reaction to these requests to the Speaker or whether they just kept on the trajectory they were on, and that was they were going to bring or threaten that they would bring a no-confidence motion.
Let's talk a little in terms of readiness. Not only political parties won the electorate to go to election at this point in time.
That's the $64 million question. One is never sure. But I think the public is tired and saturated with the threats and the electorate in Guyana and the people of Guyana. I have tremendous faith in them, in their ability to see through these shenanigans of both the AFC and the APNU. And I believe they are reaching a point where they've had enough. And this situation where you have the PPP Civic being in government that has the single largest block of votes. Neither APNU nor AFC have the number of votes that the PPP has. But you have this situation in Parliament where they have 1 seat more than us. And anecdotally, we know that once there's one member away from the opposition, they will vote against or oppose any date for a sitting when that member is not there, because they must have the 33 persons physically sitting in the seat to be able to show that they have the power. So the power is one, and it's an illusion because it can only work when all 33 are there.
In terms of the cost, though, on Guyana,
yes,
for regional and general elections, it is significant. We just came out of an elections, we just possibly halfway through the term.
Yeah.
And we were going to have, or possibly we could have another elections. The cost on the country itself.
I just want to draw the attention to the public. We went through 92 the struggle for free and fair elections, and there was violence after. 97, a very hot election after the election for 2.5 years. 2001, same thing. 2006 was the first time that we'd had elections in the midst of a violent crime wave, by the way, which within a month, everything returned to normalcy. And it's in the 2006 to 2012, 2011 period that this country took off and made quantum leaps, economic growth, major projects that were taking place. All the discussions on the hydro project were started in this period. You know, the Amaila Falls didn't start in 2012. We started around 2008. I think it took us 5 years to get to the point where we went to Parliament. The specialty hospital, the CGIA, it started in this period of 2006 to 2012. And it shows when this country has a stable political environment, political leadership, both by opposition and government, what this country can do. The 10th Parliament shows the absolute opposite of what begins to happen to the country when you have irresponsible leadership on the side of the opposition and a government who is constitutionally and legitimately in office. That you have this situation where they have cut transformative projects for our country. Some of them, as I said with hydro, it took us, 5 to 7 years to reach the point where we did, and it all has to be started over again.
Looking at Mr. Ramotar's letter, I haven't seen him maybe put a timeline as to when they're hoping for this to happen. And we're about to go into the parliamentary recess in a matter of weeks. Could we expect this at possibly the next sitting? And if, let's say, it is brought at the next sitting, tell us a little about the process and what happens after if it's passed.
Well, I can't say when the next sitting would be. I know between the chief whip of the opposition and myself, we were unable to agree to any date because the opposition chief whip did not want any meeting from July 21st until October. And the July 17th, which was the only date left, was not convenient to us. And so we were willing to meet at any time between July 21st and August the 8th. And the chief whip of the opposition said absolutely not. In fact, when some of the reasons they gave was the APNU Congress. And then when I said, okay, Congress is over, let's meet in the first week of August, they said no, AFC would be out of the country. So I am not sure when the next sitting would be. But certainly, as I described earlier, once there is a motion, we haven't seen a motion. This is a letter to the president, but that whenever there is such a motion table, the speaker will have to determine whether it's in order. And so then there can be a sitting triggered and or a call by the opposition for a sitting to be held. Or that they wait for October when the recess comes to an end. So one is not sure. Those are a number of, issues we can't predict at this point. But the fact that the language is loaded by the AFC, talking about removal, defeat, language like that, that's really basically saying, a forced resignation of the cabinet, including the president. In fact, again, they're in terms of the Constitution, they're wrong on that. Because the Constitution 1066 says that, yes, you can have a no-confidence motion, but that in the interim, while the elections are called, the president and the cabinet continue, and the ministers continue until the results of those elections are announced. The new president is named, or the president is named, and then the ministers are all relieved. In other words, they step down, and the president then steps down when the new person is inaugurated. So that it isn't that you just force a resignation of a government by a no-confidence motion, and then there's no government there. That the Constitution wasn't mad. The Constitution provided for such under 1065 and 1066, so that were they to do that, the government remains, the president government remain until elections, and the Constitution does talk about elections within 3 months, or elections, an expansion of the time for elections by a 2/3 majority of the House. And so there are a number of, what you say, imponderables at this point. But the fact that the AFC felt that it had to act, and I believe too it was beginning to look rather silly in the papers after 2 weeks of saying they were going to do this and going to do that and not doing anything at all. So I'm not saying that they're not sincere in what they want to do, of their intention. But certainly I believed after 2 weeks of every day in the press, telling the press we're drafting, we're not drafting, we're going here, we're going there, that they finally were catapulted into some action. And the government has answered, as I said, Mr. Ramotar, and we are quite prepared for the response that we have given to them.
We're almost out of time. Your closing comments. What is your message to the people of Guyana with regards to all that would have happened during the 10th Parliament, and now we are seeing indications of possible elections before the constitutionally due date?
Well, I think that the public has to remember all the things that were cut by the AFC, all the projects and programs they have put into reversal by blocking them. And those that they didn't block in Parliament, they tried to block outside of Parliament. And this is the smallest party of the three parties in Parliament. So whether it is that this is the intimidatory politics of the AFC, and whether they're bolstered by the APNU and they believe that APNU Congress will give them the support they want, we'll have to wait and watch those things. But I think for the public, it's important for them to know that the AFC has taken this action, and to know that the president has responded strongly in saying, yes, you have a right. 2, your grounds are baseless. And 3, that were you to go in this direction, here are the things you're going to have to answer to the public. And we're quite confident the public are going to ask the AFC exactly the same questions we're asking.
Madam Tashira, I want to thank you very much for joining me this evening. Just a quick recap. His Excellency President Ramotar returned in the country today, received a letter dated July 17th, 2014 from the leader of the Alliance for Change, Comrade Ramotar, indicating his party's intention to move a vote of no confidence against the president and his cabinet. The president responded to Mr. Ramotar and highlighted first and foremost his constitutional right of moving such a motion.
The AFC's constitutional right, yeah.
The AFC's, but also highlighted that the grounds on which the party is attempting to move that motion is not very solid ground.
No. In our view, it's not even not solid. It's absolutely no ground. It's baseless. They're on quicksand, actually.
Right. Thank you very much, Madam Tashira.
Thank you very much.
And I want to thank you very much for joining us. Have a good rest of the evening.
Thank you.